You're listening to Systemic Error Podcast. The failure was designed.
Red State prosecutor Ghost Rob as fast refused to help him investigate ICD killing based on an article by Matthew Chapman. ICD kills, then claims a car was a weapon. Our first facts later. Harris County District Attorney Teare is investigating the shooting death of Lorenzo Salgado Araujo after ICD agents killed him in Houston, and he is doing it without federal help because the federal government did not even bother to let local investigators into the scene. That is a core fact. Everything else is the usual after-the-fact fog machine. The institutional power in this story sits where it always sits, with armed federal agents with the Justice Department and with a Trump-era enforcement apparatus that gets to act first and explain later. A county prosecutor can ask for video and witnesses. ICD gets to shoot, issue a narrative, and hold the paperwork around the truth. The official story is already cracking. I think they initially set out to strap a law enforcement vehicle and try to run down an agent, but the footage appears not to show that. A new reporting says ICD may have been looking for someone else when this encounter happened. That is not a small discrepancy. That is the difference between a lawful use of force and a lethal mistake dressed up as self-defense. When a federal agency gives a violent account that the available video does not support, the burden does not fall on the dead man to defend himself. The burden falls on the agency that killed him and on the political leadership that has spent years normalizing this kind of narrative shell game. Accountability gets outsourced. Teare is left doing basic democratic housekeeping, asking for footage, finding witnesses, trying to reconstruct events that a federal agency should already have preserved transparently. That is what institutional collapse looks like in practice. Not fireworks, not some grand constitutional crisis, just a local prosecutor digging through fragments because federal power refuses to submit to ordinary scrutiny. And the refusal matters. We were not invited into this scene is not a minor intelligence snub. It is a state telling the public that one of its armed arms can kill inside a community and decide on its own terms whether anyone else is allowed to verify what happened. The pattern is impunity, not confusion. The Trump Justice Department has already closed investigations of ICD-related deaths, including the killing of Renable in Minneapolis. That is the pattern, not isolated error, not that communication. A system that treats deaths tied to immigration enforcement as administrative noise allows public outrage, makes silence too expensive. This is how authoritarian cruelty sustains itself. The agency denies, the department buries, and the dead are forced into the role of suspected criminals even when the available evidence cuts against the official story. Deliberate harm is recast as confusion. The institution that caused the injury gets to define the terms of inquiry. ICD cannot be fixed into legitimacy. This is not a story about one agent, one bad call, or one training failure. It is a story about ICD as an institution that concentrates coercive power, operates with federal insulation, and routinely expects the public to accept its version before the facts are even accessible. That structure is the problem. The violence is not a deviation from the mission. It is what the mission authorizes. If an agency can kill a man, misdescribe that encounter, and rely on higher federal officers to close ranks, then the democratic answer is not reform theater. It is abolition. ICD is not a neutral enforcement body that occasionally misfires. It is a machine built to separate families, terrorize communities, and evade accountability when its violence becomes visible. What this story really shows, the larger lesson is simple. When the federal government arms itself against migrants and treats scrutiny as optional, truth becomes contingent on who controls the scene, the footage, and the paperwork. That is why local investigators matter here and why their effort is already an indictment of the federal response. A democracy does not survive by pretending this is normal. It survives by naming the machinery, rejecting the loss attached to it, and refusing to let federal violence hide behind procedural arrogance. You've been listening to Systemic Error. Thanks to our story for today's article with the automated voice of Diana. Thanks for listening.